Shodhanandana Jaya Braj Jana Ranjana Jaya Yamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Kunj Bihari Jaya Jamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Radha Madhava Radha Madhava Radhe Jai Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Shri Radha Madhav ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. So now we'll say the prayers to the spiritual master. Om Jnanam Timirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadammayam Yadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavangsha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitangsha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanustute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyasya Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Just give me 1 second. 1 minute. Okay, so Karma Yoga, chapter 3. So I have a more, you could say, traditional um, uh, presentation on chapter 3 that we can go section by section through the chapter, which we will do. But before we do that, I want to first speak in general a little bit about karma, because the topic of this chapter is Karma Yoga. The philosophy of karma is something that the Gita speaks about in this chapter, but is often misunderstood. So we'll first just look at what karma is, and then I will discuss the different sections, and we'll look at more at the verses. Once again, thank you everyone for joining. It's Saturday morning. You could be doing so many things, but you're here studying Bhagavad Gita, and you're absorbing yourself in the Gita. This is so wonderful. So in chapter 3, Krishna is dividing this chapter in 3 main parts. And these 3 parts are all about karma and karma yoga, which I'll explain to you. There's a slight difference of understanding in the way that we understand these words. So the first 9 texts, renunciation of work or work in devotion. The first 9 texts, Krishna and Arjuna are discussing which is better. Is renunciation of work better or work in devotion better? Which one of these is better? Why is this come up? Why is this topic come up in chapter 3? Who knows? Who can say? What is the reason? Now in chapter 2, we've just talked about the knowledge of the soul. We've talked about Buddhi Yoga. We've spoken about acting in Krishna consciousness with our intelligence. So what is the connecting point? I mean, there's nothing wrong in discussing this, but what is the connection point? What is the flow between chapter 2 and chapter 3? Who can say?
Krishna answering the question of Arjuna's second question, that he said he will renounce, he would like to renounce then fight.
Yes, very nice. So in this chapter, Krishna is responding to Arjuna's question. The chapter starts with Arjuna's question, where Arjuna says that, "Oh Krishna, if you want me to renounce work, then why do you want to engage me in this ghastly warfare? Why do you want me to fight?" So that's very good, that's correct. But let's go even a step deeper. Why is Arjuna asking this question?
I think Krishna said that knowledge is better than doing work, something like that.
Yes, in chapter 2, Krishna is speaking about Buddhi Yoga. He's talking about the intelligence. He's talking about the engaging one's Buddhi Yoga, which is the same as Bhakti Yoga, we said, but it's focused on knowledge and intelligence. So he says to Krishna, he says, "You've just spoken about the knowledge of the soul, and you just encouraged me to engage in Buddhi Yoga. So now, why are you asking me to engage in this work? Why engage me in this ghastly warfare?" So this is a natural question. And here Krishna clarifies the distinction between renunciation of work and work in devotion, and how actually they're the same thing, but of the two, work in devotion is better. Sankhya and karma are, Sankhya Yoga and Karma Yoga lead to the same goal, but of the two, Karma Yoga is better for those who are embodied. Then after establishing that Karma Yoga is the correct path for most of us, then Krishna takes us on a journey. He takes us on a step-by-step path, a ladder, all the way to Bhakti Yoga. He then talks more about Karma Yoga. After establishing what Karma Yoga is, he expands on it. He says, what is the different levels of Karma Yoga and how Karma Yoga should be done. And finally, on this path, there's some pitfalls. There's some things we have to be aware of. We have to be cautious about. So karma yoga by itself, working for Krishna by itself, is ultimately will take us to the goal. But by itself, it's not enough to take us quickly to the goal. Because if we are performing karma yoga with lust and anger, the effect will be very slow or will be ineffective. So he says, be aware of lust and anger. So by avoiding these two things while performing karma yoga, then we can actually perform bhakti yoga. Right? So lust and anger are two great dangerous enemies on this path. And Krishna ends this chapter by warning us about them and saying, while performing your karma yoga and your bhakti yoga, don't let this overcome you. So the Gita has 5 traditional themes: Atma, Prakriti, Karma, Kala, and Ishvara. In the second chapter, Krishna focused on Atma, a little bit on Ishvar, and a little bit on all 5 topics, but primarily was focused on the Atma. And in this chapter, Krishna focuses on karma. So we start with the first question, the English word reincarnation. Who can say what is reincarnation?
The soul taking another body?
Yes, the transmigration of the soul through different bodies. This is called reincarnation. So Christians speak about incarnation, the incarnation of God. That means God coming in incarnate form. The word incarnate is an English word that comes from you could say, is an etymology of the word carnal. Carnal means physical. That's why they say carnal pleasures, which means physical pleasures, or material. So Jesus Christ for Christians is God in a material body. God incarnating in a physical material body, because Jesus Christ had a physical material body and they believe he's God. They use the word incarnation in that sense. We are using the word reincarnation. Eastern traditions use the word reincarnation in the sense of the soul, the eternal spiritual soul, incarnating into a carnal body, into a physical body. And because the soul does this again and again from one body to another, it is called reincarnation, incarnating again and again in these different bodies. So it's actually a very precise term, because the soul is spiritual, but it becomes incarcerated in a carnal, this is all it's all the same word. It becomes incarcerated in a carnal body again and again, and that is called reincarnation. So this is what Krishna has described just now in the second chapter. Dehinosmin yatha dehe kaumaram yauvanam jara tatha dehantara praptir dhiras tatra namohyati. This painting that a devotee has so nicely drawn is a painting of that specific verse, which says that in this body, the soul transmigrates from childhood to youth to old age. Similarly, the soul passes to another body at the time of death. So reincarnation, that word actually also applies to our present body. In this life, we have reincarnated in so many bodies. And at death, we reincarnate into another body, into another baby body, in some species, in some place in the universe. Now, in this chapter, Krishna is saying, well, what is karma? We talked about reincarnation, this Atma, in the last chapter. Now he says, what is karma? So to make this question even more precise, how does karma relate to reincarnation? What is karma in the context of reincarnation? Who can answer?
Karma is something that is forcing us to reincarnate.
Karma is something that is forcing us to reincarnate. Okay, I like that very much. Someone else, another way to put this. our desires in some ways are forcing us to reincarnate. Our ichha, our ignorance, our desires are keeping us in this material world. But then karma does exactly what? It forces us to reincarnate, but exactly how does it do that?
It makes us to do action.
It makes, well, it doesn't make us to do action. The soul is active and wants to do action. Karma is what determines which body we will reincarnate into. It determines the form of our reincarnation. So reincarnation is there. That means the soul incarnating again and again. But what is the mechanism that tells us which body we will reincarnate into? That is karma. Right? So very scientific. Karma and reincarnation, therefore, go hand in hand. They both go together. One cannot really speak about reincarnation without speaking about karma, and one cannot speak about karma without reincarnation. Because if you get a bad reaction, you can only suffer it if you have a future to suffer it. So in some ways, reincarnation, karma requires reincarnation as well. Now, this word karma itself, to answer this question, what is karma? The word karma itself just means action. It doesn't mean the cycle of action and reaction. Karma itself just means action. And therefore, in the Gita, when Krishna speaks about karma yoga, then he's speaking about the yoga of action, meaning linking to God through action. He's not speaking about karma yoga, the yoga of reaction. No. Karma just means action, period. Not even in the material sense. Why? Because, for example, in the 4th chapter, it says, Janma karma chame divyam. Evam yo veti tatvata. Tyaktva deham punar janma. Naiti mameti sorjana. Krishna says in the Gita that one who knows the nature of my janma, of my birth, and my karma, of my activities, that person never takes birth again in this material world. So in relation to even Krishna, the word karma is used. Therefore, karma by definition is not material. Karma can be spiritual activities. Krishna is saying, if you know the nature of my spiritual birth and my spiritual activities, you don't take birth in this world. Because Krishna also performs karma. The soul also performs karma in the spiritual world. Now, in the material world, this word karma takes two meanings. One is action, spiritual or material action in this world. But another sense is that karma refers to the law of action and reaction. So when we tell someone, oh, this was my karma, then we're referring to the law of action and reaction. When we say he's performing very nice karma, then we say, oh, he's performing very nice actions. So depending on the context, this word has a different meaning. And one has to be careful because not everywhere does it have the connotation of material action and reaction. Because the mundane translators, they take this verse, Janma karma chame divyam, and they say, see, Krishna is also bound by karma. Because he's saying here, Janma karma. Krishna is, under karma, but no. Karma is, there's nothing in the, there's nothing that decides that this is, there's nothing in the Sanskrit language that says that this only refers to material karma. So karma means all of these things, but in our specific context, it means, or not our specific context, generally it means the law of action and reaction. Karma means action, and it also refers to the law of karma. What goes around comes around. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And it also refers to Newton's third law of motion. Who can say what is Newton's third law of motion?
For every action, there is equal and opposite reaction.
Yes, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So karma is something very scientific, and Krishna specifically made it this way just so we can lead a very peaceful life. This is actually a fact. Karma, just like the laws of nature are universal, they apply on everyone and they apply in every single circumstance. So it's not that the law of gravity will apply to my phone, but not your phone. If you or I, either one, we drop our phone, it's going to break, because the law of gravity applies to both phones. I hope we don't break our phone, but since we often do, that's why I'm using this example. It doesn't matter how expensive the phone is. We can have a $2,000 phone or $100 phone. The law of gravity won't make any distinction. If there's a bad action, the reaction will come. So just like there are universal physical laws, what karma is telling us is that there are also universal moral laws, which makes sense, right? I mean, why should there be a universal law of gravity? But it exists and it's universal. In the same way, there are universal moral laws that if we do something wrong, that wrong will come back to us. There's no third path, unless, of course, we surrender to Krishna. But even in that situation, why do devotees suffer? Because even in that situation, Krishna makes us understand that what we did was wrong and wants us to learn from that experience. Similarly, if we do something good, if we serve someone, if we put some good out in the world, no one may recognize it, no one may see it, the world may ignore it, but ultimately that goodness will come back to us. Ultimately, that goodness will come back to us, without a doubt. But because virtue or righteousness means that we don't do it for the result, therefore Krishna oftentimes doesn't give us the result immediately. The laws of nature don't show that result immediately. But ultimately, those who put good out in the world, good comes back to them. Those who put kindness, compassion out in the world, they receive that in return. Just yesterday, we had a convocation at my university, and the professor who was giving this convocation, the keynote address was given by a professor. He's been teaching there now 25 years, an older person, very respected in the community. And he gave a presentation on kindness, a very nice presentation, actually. And his point was that a real man is someone who's kind, and how in our culture we value other things now more. So he gave this very nice presentation, and he gave various examples of people who performed acts of kindness, but and were amply rewarded and recognized for the kindness that they did. But many people, I'm sure in the audience, were thinking that, what about the times when people perform kindness and no one notices? Why should I be kind at that time? Why should I perform good activities when no one notices? Karma gives us a reason to do so. And karma also gives us a reason not to suffer if we have been wronged, because we know that whoever has wronged us, they will get that karma back in return. So what is karma? Karma means you are free to make any decision you wish, but you are not free from the consequences of that decision. So people ask in the Gita and in our Vedic philosophy, is there something like free will? Well, karma presupposes free will. A person is only responsible for their action, or can be only held responsible if they are free to act. And because we are free to act, therefore we are responsible for what we do. So we are free to make any decision we want, almost any decision. We cannot fly in the sky. Within what we can do, we're free to make a decision. But we are not free from the consequences of that decision. Then we are bound. And therefore, Prabhupada says, this is why this material world is an impossible place. This is why we should surrender to Krishna. Because we're always bound. Even if we breathe, we kill mosquitoes. We're always bound by that consequence. So the only solution is to surrender to Krishna. Of course, we have to we have to not perform bad karma intentionally. That is sinning on the strength of the holy name. We have to make all efforts to do the right thing. Otherwise, the karma will come to us. But we're always bound by the consequence of our decision. Now someone will say, but so many people have wronged me. And therefore, I am unable to act piously. But a famous motivational speaker, Wayne Dyer, he said, how people treat you is their karma. How you react is yours. So we all, and that kind of fits in with the previous quote that I made, that I wrote here, that I got, is that our freedom is always still with us. So while we are not in control of what comes to us due to past reactions or due to present situations, how we react is our decision. Do we react in a Krishna conscious way? Do we react in an attached way? Do we react in a detached way? Do we react in a compassionate way? This is in our hands. How people treat us is not in our hands, but how we react is in our hands. And our reaction will also change the way people treat us, hopefully, eventually, maybe. So even material motivational speakers, people of this world who are not exactly in touch with Krishna consciousness, they find karma to be actually a very motivational concept, a very inspiring concept. If karma was pessimism, then why would people like Wayne Dyer quote it? Because it's not. Yes, we are bound by the reaction of our past, but the future is in our hands. Karma is saying you are in control of your future. Because like Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he said, very famous quote, he said, no one can hurt us. Ultimately, he said, no one can hurt us other than our own selves. Because of this philosophy of karma, if we're doing the right thing, ultimately, no one can hurt us. And the Lord is also there to protect us. So now, this is what karma means. Now, we said that how karma determines our next life, right? We said that karma is used to decide in which body do we reincarnate. But there's actually two factors that determine our next life. Who can say what are these two factors? What are two things that will determine our next life? And we can think in this regard, we can think about the body like a car, a vehicle, and the person, the soul, like the driver of the body. So when the car gets very old, then we go to a car dealership and we choose a different car. We decide on a new car. So think about the factors that determine our next car, our next vehicle. And in the same way, the soul is, and relate that with the way that the soul decides its next body.
Our desires.
Satyaraj Prabhu, you can go first and then please.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. So this is my understanding. Like the two factors. One is like
Just say
what
one.
we.
Just say one, and
Okay.
then that's not. Yes.
Oh, okay. So what we do in this life,
Hmm.
okay, that determines what are the consequences that we are going to face in the next body.
Okay, very nice. Perfect. So the first thing that determines our next life is what we do. And someone can say the second one.
What we think about when we leave our body determines the next body, Prabhu.
Very nice. So this is directly from the Gita. But why what we think about at the end of our life? Let's be more specific. Let's say to a person who's new to Krishna consciousness. I mean, that seems pretty random. Why? What if I'm a really nice person, or and I just have a bad thought at the end of my life? So why specifically that are you mentioning?
Like specifically, I mean, for example, if I'm ardently thinking about my pet, and then you probably would come back in that. Or if you are thinking too much about the attachment with your kids or something, you come back as a human. Is that somewhat right way
Yes.
to say that?
No, that's very nice. A nice way to say that. But at the same time, um, at the same time, that still may not answer the question that, well, I made a mistake at the end of my life, but what about the rest of my life? Rashi Mataji or Varsha, one of you would like to answer that question?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare
This is
Krishna.
Rashi. So I think the soul wanted to do something and which they could not do in this life, the unfulfilled desires. So probably that's why soul wanted to take birth in that particular body so that they can fulfill their tendencies or desires.
So this is relating with Purnamasi Mataji's point. Very nice point that, well, at the end of life, our desires are very important because those are probably unfulfilled desires which the soul wants to fulfill. Therefore, they're very significant. Very good. Varsha Mataji, do you have something to add to this?
Yeah, I'm suppose giving same answer, desires.
So yes, at the end of our life, generally, what we is given focus. It's given focus, but in general, it's what we desire that determines our next life. So what we do and what we desire. Now, why the end of life is given focus? Because generally speaking, the strongest desire that we have in this life manifests at the end of our life. So if our strongest attachment is to our children, like Purnamasi Mataji mentioned, then at the end of our life, we will think of them like a Jamil. He called out Narayana, thinking of his son. It's actually very interesting. People have done studies on what's the last thing that people say at the end of their life. It's actually a study that people have done, and by that they're able to understand, what's dearest to these people, and it's interesting to see, what do people think about at the end of their life when they have a moment left, when they have 5 minutes left, when they have 2 minutes left. What do they say? And of course, generally speaking, it's a family member that they remember, and then after that, it's like but the main thing was it was a family member that people remembered. So so this is something that is very, very common, very natural. And that's why if a devotee throughout his life, if he desires the service of the Lord, then at the end of his life, that will become his final desire. It will become his final thought. And because even in the general normal world, people recognize this, That's why they have Make-A-Wish foundations, specifically for people who have desires when they're about to die. You may ask, why not for younger people? But they know that this is such a strong desire. And therefore, out of sort of material philanthropy, they have this Make-A-Wish foundation that when people are dying, let's fulfill their desires. So the two things that determine our next life is what we deserve and what we desire. And what we deserve limits what we desire. It tempers our desires. So a nice example is as follows. Let's say summer is coming up now. People, students will have summer break. So during our summer break, someone has a desire that I will go to Alaska, right, or to Hawaii, some beautiful place. And this is what your desire is. Now, you haven't worked very hard. You haven't saved your money. You've been spending it, here and there. So you look in your bank balance and you only have $1,000. So you realize I cannot go to Alaska or Hawaii, but your desire is to go on a vacation. So because you don't have enough money, what you deserve is not a vacation to Alaska or Hawaii. You still go on a vacation, but rather than going on a vacation to a beautiful spot like that, you go to a vacation to a nearby town or city. You go to some lake nearby and you just spend time there. So you still go on a vacation, but what you deserved limited what you desired. In the same way, if at the end of our life, if someone has really developed the desire of to fly, right? Let's say they were doing skydiving throughout their life. And people who do skydiving, they say that it's the highest pleasure they experience in the world. I actually read this somewhere. They said once they're off of the plane and flying in the sky, first they just fall, and then in the middle, the parachute comes up. That thrill of adrenaline of almost smashing into a rock, that is the highest pleasure that they experience in this material world. So let's say at the end of their life, they have a desire to fly. And then in their mind, they think, oh, and then in my next life, I'm going to become an angel. And I'm going to fly around and just, be this angelic human being. Well, during their life, they weren't such a good person, right? They robbed a few banks, beat up a few people. So Yamaraj then sees, well, this person has a desire to fly, but he hasn't been such a good person. So rather than being an angel in their next life, which they're thinking they'll be, they end up becoming a pigeon. So the desire is still fulfilled. Material nature must fulfill that desire so that in our next life, we don't have that desire again. But it becomes limited by what we deserve. It becomes tempered. We still fulfill that desire, but in a more less enjoyable way. In a less enjoyable way. So we know that there's 8,400,000 species of life. And all these species of life are manifestations of the different desires of the living entity. Each species is best at performing a specific form of sense enjoyment. Like Prabhupada says, if a person has the desire for sex enjoyment, then the pigeon can perform, is very good at that, can perform that same activity many, many more times in a more efficient way than a human being can. So one will become a pigeon. In the same way, if a person has a desire to eat all types of foodstuffs, meat and anything and everything, then that desire is best fulfilled in the form of a tiger or a lion. They can eat everything and anything, whatever they like. They don't need to cook it. They don't need to, peel it, nothing. They just eat it. So these are all different species of life in which we fulfill different desires. Now, one may ask that the next question comes is, well, what is special then about human form of life? why Krishna is teaching karma yoga to Arjuna? Why not to the other species? Because it's only in the human form of life that we actually gain good or bad karma. In all the other species, we're simply burning off karma. We don't gain karma. Human life is the only life in which we can change our destiny. We can actually change the future and break the cycle of karma. And Prabhupada gives this example. He says that when a human being crosses the street on a red light, the human being gets a ticket. But when a dog crosses the red light, the dog doesn't get a ticket. Why? Because human life is a life of responsibility. We have higher faculties of discrimination. We can discriminate between right and wrong in a way that the animal cannot. The animal is simply acting out of instinct. So we become an animal as a result of bad karma, or slightly even good karma, depending on which animal we become. But then as an animal, we're just spending our bank balance. We don't get a new bank balance. If an animal does something bad, it doesn't get bad karma. So this is the importance of human life, and therefore there are serious consequences because if we do something bad, we may go into the animal species of life. Let's say we become a bird, then we have to come through all of the different species of life from that bird up to a human being. So it might be 1,000,000 lifetimes, depending on where we reincarnate to in this thing. And that has to do with our sinful activities. Obviously bugs and slugs, like these are more sinful. Karma leads to that. And then one has to work one's way back up to the human form of life. And so there's a high price to pay. Now, what about good karma? If we get good karma and we become a demigod, then there we enjoy the results of the good karma. But the devas, they don't get bad karma if they act badly. This is why you see that oftentimes the devas, they perform bad things, but they never seem to get a big reaction for it. Again, this is because in those lives, those forms, one is simply enjoying the good results of one's activities, but one does not, if there's so much enjoyment, one is almost bound by that enjoyment. Just like in the animal life, there's so much suffering, one is conditioned by that suffering. The demigods, there's too much pleasure there. They cannot not enjoy. And that's why even their life is not as fortunate as a human life. Human life has just the right balance of happiness and suffering so that we can make true decisions. We can actually distinguish between good and bad. And in this way, break out of this cycle and go back home, back to Godhead. So we may go through these millions of lifetimes of action and reaction, of reincarnation. What is the purpose? Why is Krishna putting us through this? Is it just so we, one time, win the lottery and the another time we get thrown under a bus? No, the goal of reincarnation and karma is to stop reincarnating. This process of karma is the process of learning. The soul is learning. Although we don't remember our past lives, the soul learns from its past experiences. And then after learning from its past experiences, its desires changes. The desires of the soul start to change. And as a result of the suffering also, eventually the soul turns towards God. It turns towards Krishna. And Krishna then becomes involved in our life. So an example of how karma changes us is there might be two brothers in the same family. Exact same parents, same upbringing, same everything. But one brother decides to experiment with drugs, but another brother does not. What is the difference between the two? Why is one fortunate and the other not so fortunate? Because the one that did not has probably experienced this in a past life. He knows, been there, done that. The subtle consciousness tells him, no, don't want to do this. And the other brother hasn't. So though they have the same parents and the same upbringing, they have different experiences from the past that is causing them to act in different ways. And by not experimenting with drugs, then a person may become more thoughtful or have the opportunity to be thoughtful about spiritual life. Or maybe because of drugs, a person becomes thoughtful after that bad experience. But either way, through that suffering, one has learned something and one begins to search. Well, then what is the higher pleasure? This drugs didn't give me pleasure. So now what is the higher pleasure? Just recently, someone was saying that how drug addiction is so bad that most people, when they leave, they come back to it. Like other things you can cure, but you cannot cure drug addiction. It's so difficult for most people. 20% can, but they have to be very determined and secondly, very spiritual. All rehab drug places, rehabilitation places, they know that spiritual life has to be a part of any form of recovery. And Prabhupada showed this by his example. He was the only person who was able to take the hippies off of drugs. And therefore, even the police would drop them off at his storefront because he gave them a higher taste, a true taste, the taste of spiritual life. So the goal of reincarnation and karma is to be a school of hard knocks. And through this school of hard knocks, the soul learns, eventually turns towards God. And when it turns towards Krishna, then it breaks the cycle of reincarnation. And how does one stop this cycle? This is where we start chapter 3. This is why chapter 3 is so relevant. Our human condition, our human problem is this cycle of karma, reincarnation, birth after birth, birth and death, birth, old age, disease, and death. Our human problem is karma, the cycle of karma. And the solution is what? The solution is karma yoga. Right? Karma is the problem, but the very problem is solved by karma yoga. And that's why Krishna now speaks about karma yoga. Now, in this chapter, Krishna goes through 3 different, you could say, progressive stages of breaking this cycle. The first, most basic level, which many shastras speak about, even even other religions, is to perform good works, purification of existence. Because if we're engaged in grossly sinful activities, how can we perform karma yoga? Prabhupada in one place says that if one performs illicit sex life, he says it is almost impossible to reach God in that same life. He says it is impossible unless one gets the association of the pure devotee of the Lord. It is not possible to go back to Godhead, but by the mercy of the pure devotee of the Lord, one may still be able to do it. So when a soul is very grossly engaged in sinful activities, they cannot reach the kingdom of God. Generally speaking, mercy is always there. But in the norm, they keep going down and down. And therefore, why do the Vedas take so much trouble? Books and books, the original Vedas, are all about karma kanda, that is, ritualistic activities of purification, ritualistic traditions. Why is Arjuna in the first chapter, why is he so concerned about breaking family traditions, about destroying the religious practices, which are all, you could say, materialistic religion in some ways? They're all, these things. Because if you break this down, if you have a society like the society which we have today, a society where there's no principles, no practice of dharma, then that society is doomed. Then that society, it's very hard to make that whole society Krishna conscious. As we see today, a few people, they get the mercy of the devotees and they get attracted to Krishna. But mass scale in terms of civilization, like kings before, the whole society, was devotees. Doing that becomes impossible, literally. Therefore, the first practice in breaking this cycle of karma is karma kanda. Vyasa wrote the 4 Vedas, and we say that Veda is not different than God. We say Veda is eternal, yet none of us read the Vedas. As devotees, we never read the Vedas. And you might think, well, why all this? And why is it so special? Because karma kanda also is very important. It has its place. These Vedas are made for the whole society. And before, Vedic culture was so exalted because they were following karma kanda. But now, Krishna in this chapter pushes us further. And he says, karma kanda is not enough. Don't stay there. Look at the purpose of karma kanda. Karma kanda's very purpose was to take us to Krishna, purify our existence to take us to Krishna. But if you get involved just in the purification, you forget the goal. It's just like someone going to the airport, but then forgetting to take the flight. Karma kanda takes us to the airport. It's the airport. But if you forget to take the flight and you just start decorating the airport, you start buying things at the airport, then you lost the opportunity. So karma yoga is the perfection of karma kanda, which means act for the Lord. Link to God through action. It also means, karma yoga means performing activities in line with God's instructions. So someone may not even be doing something directly for the Lord, but a person can be performing karma yoga if they're living their life according to the directions of the Lord. That is also karma yoga, because you are in some ways offering your works to God by living in the way that God wants us to live. So that is karma yoga. Another path that's emphasized by many different religious traditions, like Buddhism, for example, that believe in karma, is detachment. They say that the way to break out of the cycle is not to be attached. It's attachment that keeps us bound. The only problem with this philosophy is that, as we saw, even good works bind us to this world. Because if you do something good, the good reaction comes. If you do a good reaction, if you get a good reaction, then you have to come back to enjoy that reaction. Just like if you perform good activities, souls are born as demigods. Souls who do good activities are born as demigods. But then as a demigod, you have to come back and enjoy. And then as a demigod, you can make big mistakes. You can get cursed by sages. So there's no karma there, but there are curses. So they get cursed by sages, and then they have to become a crocodile for 1,000 years, or they turn into something else. So it's very risky. So even good activities are binding. So just giving up desire by itself is there, but it's very dangerous. And therefore, Krishna says in this Gita, both Sankhya Yoga and Karma Yoga are one and the same. And they're both paths to break the cycle. But of the two, Karma Yoga is better. One cannot truly give up desire. So giving up desire means engaging our desires in Krishna's service. So how do we break out of this cycle? Let's take an analogy, a metaphor. And this is actually Prabhupada's metaphor. I read it somewhere. He says that how a soldier is on the battlefield, and the soldier on the battlefield may kill so many people. And when the soldier comes back, he gets a gold medal or silver medal or the purple medal. Now that same soldier takes the same gun and goes to a city street and kills one person. And that same soldier is then hanged. He's killed. Now, the question that comes up is, what is the difference? Why in one case did the soldier perform the same activity but receive the purple heart, and in the other case the same soldier is performing the same thing, only less of it, and is behind bars for the rest of their life? The difference is that in the first case, he was performing those activities on the direction or for the purpose of someone else. The war may be unjustified. It's justified or unjustified, but the reaction for the war goes to the commander, goes to the commander-in-chief. The soldier does not take the reaction because he's not acting on his own free will. But in the second case, he's acting for his own purpose. And therefore, whatever the reaction is, the soldier has to suffer. So the problem with karma is that you do good activities or bad activities. If action is itself the problem, then if you perform good activities, you'll still get a reaction. The only solution is no action. If action brings a reaction, then the only solution is no action. But in the Gita, Krishna tells Arjuna very clearly, he says it's not possible not to act. So we cannot not act. And because for that reason, that option is also not there. But then how can we become free of the reaction? Only by akarma, not only by not acting, but we cannot act if we don't act for ourselves. If we act for Krishna, then that reaction goes to Krishna. Reaction is still there, but like in the case of the soldier, it doesn't come to us, it goes to Krishna. And that is called Bhakti Yoga. When we act for Krishna, then the Karma Yoga is Bhakti Yoga, and then there's no reaction. So there's a whole thought process, a whole reasoning here, and hopefully I made it clear that the first step is good or bad action doesn't free us from the cycle because it's always going to bring a reaction. Therefore, the second step is, therefore, the only solution is no action. That is Sankhya, that is detachment, that is giving up desire. Like the Buddhists say, no desire, right? If there's no desire, there's no action, break out of the cycle. But that's not possible because we have to act. Therefore, the solution is no action for oneself, act only for Krishna. So now in texts 9 and 10, on this point that we've been discussing, Krishna talks about this, and I'll read a few of these verses, and then we'll open it up for discussion. So let me just go here. Actually, I find this to be very, very engaging, this chapter. Okay, so here Arjun starts with this question. He says, Jayasi chet karmanaste mata buddhir janardana tat kim karmani ghore ma niyojayasi Keshava. Arjuna said, O Janardana, O Keshava, why do you want to engage me in this ghastly warfare if you think that intelligence is better than fruitive work? So here Prabhupada talks about Buddhi Yoga, that because Krishna in the last chapter recommended Buddhi Yoga, Arjuna is now confused. My intelligence is now bewildered by your equivocal instructions. Therefore, please tell me decisively which will be most beneficial for me. Now Krishna begins to speak. Lokesmin vividha nishta pura prokta mayanaga yana yogena sankhyanam karma yogena yoginam. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, O sinless Arjuna, I have already explained that there are two classes of men who try to realize the self. Some are inclined to understand it by empirical, philosophical speculation, and others by devotional service. These are the paths of Sankhya and Karma. Not by merely abstaining from work can one achieve freedom from reaction, nor by renunciation alone can one attain perfection.
Prabhuji, I've lost your audio.
Oh, really? Okay. Can others hear me?
Yes.
Okay, you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, so hopefully you'll come back. So, not from abstaining from work, Krishna is saying, nor by renunciation alone can one attain perfection. Why? This is the philosophy of karma here. Exactly. People say, well, where is karma in the Gita? This is where it is. If you abstain from work, that's not possible. And if you renounce and you only perform good activities, you'll still get a reaction. Everyone is forced, Krishna says, to act helplessly according to the qualities he has acquired from the modes of material nature. Therefore, no one can refrain from doing something, not even for a moment. Right? So, very famous verse of the Gita. Krishna here, sort of, you could say, disputes. He contradicts Buddhism. He says, no, it's not possible. No one can refrain from doing something, not even for a moment. It is our nature to be active. We must act. And in fact, we will act according to the qualities we have acquired from the modes of nature. Then he says, in fact, if you try to become detached artificially, if you try to artificially renounce the objects of the senses, you will be worse off. You'll become a pretender. One who restrains the senses of action, but whose mind dwells on sense objects, certainly deludes himself and is called a pretender. So it's better to act than to become a false renunciate. It's in the next purport where Prabhupada says something very amazing. On the other hand, if a sincere person tries to control the active senses by the mind and begins karma yoga in Krishna consciousness without attachment, he is by far superior. Very famous verse. On the other hand, if a sincere person controls the senses and begins karma yoga by regulated Krishna consciousness without attachment, he is by far superior. And here in the purport, Prabhupada says, a sincere person who follows this method is far better situated than the false pretender who adopts show bottle spiritualism to cheat the innocent public. A sincere sweeper in the street is far better than a charlatan meditator who meditates only for the sake of making a living. So, Prabhupada saying a street sweeper, just imagine, that person probably has no knowledge, this, that. A street sweeper is better than a charlatan meditator, because show bottle spiritualism is so much looked down upon. Now, Prabhupada here is not saying that we should just stay as a street sweeper. He's also not saying that, but he's saying that a street sweeper is better than a charlatan meditator. But the best is to become a karma yogi, to perform our activities rather than artificially giving up our actions to connect to God through karma, to connect to Krishna through our activities for Krishna. So one has different paths in life, right? One can give up one's work and become a meditator and give up one's job, let's say. Another path is to keep one's job, but to give up the fruits of one's work to Krishna. One offers charity to God. So Prabhupada is saying that if we're not ready and spiritually evolved enough, keeping our work, but giving the results of our work is better than just renunciation of our work. But one who can renounce their work without being a charlatan, but can genuinely, is on that level of self-realization where they can genuinely become attached to Krishna and not become not further hanker for material things, that is the best. In the same way, if one can work for the Lord and 100% engage all one's activities in the Lord, that is the same thing, and that is just as good as someone who has given up their work. Therefore, ultimately, Krishna says Sankhya and Karma are the same thing. But at the same time, if one giving up the world too quickly, or in other words, becoming too renounced too quickly, can also be an anartha, where we see that anartha sometimes doesn't work out so well for devotee spiritual life. We want to we're proud, we want to become a pure devotee too quickly without going through the process, without hearing what the spiritual master is telling us to do. Just this morning, I was hearing a class by Srila Prabhupada, and Prabhupada was saying that material life is finished when we are convinced that Krishna and his holy name are non-different. He says, Krishna is there when we are convinced that there's no difference between Krishna and his holy name. Very amazing. Prabhupada is making this point. He says, we don't have to wait for anything. He says, as soon as we're convinced of this fact, Krishna is there. Material life is finished. And so then a disciple asks this question. He says, okay, Srila Prabhupada, if I'm convinced that Krishna and his holy name are non-different, can I go to the forest? And he says, just like Arjun, he's saying, oh, Krishna, you said Buddhi Yoga, I don't have to fight, perfect, found my way out. So the disciple is asking this, I found this. I can now not have to work so hard in Krishna consciousness, not have to distribute books or, publish books about Krishna consciousness. I can just, Krishna, the material life is finished. And Prabhupada says, but no, he responds to the disciple, he says, but you are doing that for your own benefit. You are going to the forest for your own benefit, not for Krishna's service. And therefore you have not understood that Krishna and his name are non-different. Because you are going for your own benefit, not for Krishna's desire. He says, if you give others the holy name, and Prabhupada actually says this, he uses exactly these words. He says, if you give Krishna, the name of Krishna to others, then that is better. Then that is what Krishna wants. Then you're not thinking just of yourself, but you're thinking about others also. It's a very amazing lecture. I hear this on this app called Kathamrita. So I never know exactly which lecture it is because it's like a Prabhupada radio. It's called Kathamrita. You can download it on your iPhone. It's you just have to click one button and lectures start. It's like a Krishna conscious radio. So I don't know exactly which class it was, but Prabhupada was saying that how this is why we have the Krishna consciousness movement and why devotees take so much effort and struggle to perform so many activities in Krishna service, in Krishna consciousness, because of this principle that that renunciation is the result of purification, not the means of purification. The means of purification is karma yoga, is acting for Krishna, not renouncing work, but working for Krishna. Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur also wrote this book, K. Vaishnav, where he criticizes those who go to the forest and imitate Haridas Thakur. Now, Haridas Thakur is such a great personality. So why is he doing that? Because we have to be on that level. Because what Haridas Thakur is doing is very nice. But if we go to the forest, we will only be a charlatan meditator. We will only look, even in the forest, Prabhupada says, we will only look, and he says this in this lecture also, he says, in the forest, he says, you will only look for food and sex. He says, still your desire for women and money will be there. So you are saying that you're going to the forest alone. But Prabhupada says, you are going to the forest with your enemies. You're going to the forest with your senses, which is your enemies. And you're going to the forest with your desire for women and money. So that won't change in the forest. In fact, it'll only increase. An empty mind is a devil's workshop, right? So in the forest, there'll be more time, there'll be more contemplation if we still have material desires. And therefore, that will be less good than leading a so-called materialistic life in the city, serving Krishna. Perform your prescribed duty, for doing so is better than not working. One cannot even maintain one's physical body without work. Niyatam kuru karma tvam karma gyayo ya karmana sharira yatra pichate na prasidhyeda karmana. Perform your prescribed duty, for doing so is better than not working. One cannot even maintain one's physical body without work. So many of our household devotees, they feel all the time, I get this question, they'll feel that, my household life is just useless labor, and I'm not serving Krishna. I don't feel like I'm serving Krishna. That is true. That is very true. If we don't dedicate our family and our life to Krishna, then yes, then our material duty, so to say, our prescribed duty is entangling us. But if we do our service, our duty for Krishna, then that is bhakti yoga. If we perform our prescribed duty for pleasing Krishna, not over and above, but just our duty, then that is service to Krishna. Krishna is very pleased. This is why Prabhupada said in one place in regards to children is generally the most time-consuming, the most draining aspect of family life. I have 2 small children, so I can say that personally. But Prabhupada said that if we make them into devotees, then these children that we have, they become our deities. So if we are taking care of them and making them into devotees, then they are our deities, which means that is devotional service. So Krishna is saying that we all have to work according to our varna and our ashram. But if we dedicate that to Krishna, then that becomes even Raganuga Bhakti. Because devotees don't necessarily need to do something else to please Krishna. If Krishna wants them to do something else, they're willing. But oftentimes Krishna wants us to do what we are doing. And doing that is hard. But if we do that nicely for Krishna's service, that is what Krishna wants us to do. Yagyarthat karmano nyatra lokoyam karma bandhana tadartham karma kaunteya mukta sangha samachara. Work done as a sacrifice for Vishnu has to be performed. Otherwise, work causes bondage in this material world. Therefore, O son of Kunti, Perform your prescribed duties for his satisfaction, and in that way, you will always remain free from bondage. Yes. So, let me just check something. I'm not sure if I have that on a slide. I think I did, but so actually on this verse of Karma Yoga, so all of these verses, we can actually just, one could even go through the whole chapter and see Krishna's flow of reasoning. So Prabhupada's lecture on the first 5 verses of this chapter, Prabhupada, in a different lecture, he says this. He encourages us to distribute books and not to go to the forest. He says, in Vrindavan, you'll find so-called devotees of Krishna living in seclusion and supposedly chanting Hare Krishna. In practice, it has been seen that such an artificial way of trying to become Krishna conscious does not make anyone advanced. They live in a secluded place and chant Hare Krishna. But when they come out, they are smoking. They cannot even give up tobacco, let alone the other enticements of the material world. When you become mature, then you may wish to try to live in seclusion. So what I found shocking in this quote is that even living in Vrindavan, Prabhupada is saying, even if we're living in Vrindavan, one does not, he says here, we see that such an artificial way of trying to become Krishna conscious does not make anyone advanced. Even living in Vrindavan does not necessarily make one advanced if one is not ready for it, if one's not doing it in the proper way, in the proper mood. So now someone will say, well, what about the advanced person? Sorry. So he said, here's the advanced person. That person can live in Vrindavan. That person can give up their prescribed duties. That person can renounce the world. But Krishna in the Gita, even for such a person, his next then reasoning following these set of verses, he doesn't, even for that, doesn't say, says, even those people don't give up their prescribed duty. Why? A self-realized man, Krishna says, has no purpose to fulfill in the discharge of his prescribed duties, nor has he any reason not to perform such work, nor has he any need to depend on any other living being. So if one is self-realized truly, the point being here is one does not have to perform one's prescribed duty. But if one's truly self-realized and is unattached and liberated, then he also has no reason not to do his duty. That person also has no aversion to anything. That person also, because on account of them being detached, does not find performing their duty to be difficult. Prabhupada in the purport writes, a self-realized man is no longer obliged to perform any prescribed duty, save and except activities in Krishna consciousness. Krishna consciousness is not inactivity either, as will be explained in the following verses. A Krishna conscious man does not take shelter of any person, man, or demigod. Whatever he does in Krishna consciousness is sufficient in the discharge of his obligation. So a Krishna conscious person who's fully Krishna conscious, and Prabhupada actually in the purport, he italicizes the word fully, that person has no duty to fulfill. So Arjun may say, well, I'm self-realized, so I'm not going to perform this duty. But no, that doesn't work. Why? Because aversion to an activity is also a form of attachment. So if Arjun is averse to fighting, then he's not a pure devotee and he's still attached. And if he is a pure devotee, then he won't be averse to fighting. So when Krishna is asking him to fight, he's going to fight. So therefore, still a devotee performs his duty, but only for the service of Krishna, if Krishna wants him to do it. Like Arjuna, he's fighting in the battle only because Krishna wants him to do it. However, there's also one more reason why the devotee, although he has no obligation to do duties, may still perform his duty. And that's described in text 20 to 25. Krishna says, King such as Janaka attained perfection solely by performance of prescribed duties. Janaka is Sita Devi's father. Therefore, just for the sake of educating the people in general, you should perform your work. Just for the sake of educating the people in general, right? To set an example for others, one may still do one's prescribed duty. Whatever action a great man performs, common men follow. And whatever standards he sets by exemplary acts, all the world pursues. Very famous verse of the Gita. So, self-realized souls such as Janaka still perform their duty because the whole world would follow them. They were great people. They're setting an example for others. As the ignorant perform their duties with attachment to results, the learned may similarly act, but without attachment, for the sake of leading people on the right path. So, what is then the difference of consciousness? If both the self-realized person and the materialistic person are performing the same activities, the ignorant person is attached while doing those activities. Therefore, there's a lot of pain and suffering involved. But the learned person is detached. And that detachment makes all the difference. And they do so just to lead the people on the right path. So this is where I will stop. This is chapter 3 for you. And it's perfect timing. It's 10:30. So let me just see, just make sure if I didn't miss anything. What's up? Oh yes, that's the point I wanted to make. I kept on thinking. So I'm not sure where that slide went. That's the thing. I think it comes later on. So I don't have a slide for this, so you can just listen carefully. So there's, in Karma Yoga, there's 2 stages. There's Nishkam Karma Yoga and there's Sakam Karma Yoga. Sakam Karma Yoga is performing activities for Krishna, but with personal desires. Sakam Karma Yoga means working for Krishna. No, doing the work that you want to do, being attached to the work, but giving part of the result to Krishna. So Sakam Karma Yoga means you're attached to the work, you're also attached to the part of the result, but you offer the results to Krishna, a certain percentage of it or most of it. That is called Sakam Karma Yoga. Nishkam Karma Yoga is where you act, but you act without any desire. You're just acting for Krishna. But you're still attached to working, right? You're still attached to the work. So now the thing is that in either case, whatever the situation may be, one may think that, well, okay, so sorry, I just lost my train of thought. So Sakam Karma Yoga is when we're attached to the work and we're attached to part of the result. Nishkam Karma Yoga is when we're attached to the work. We're working for Krishna, so we're attached to working and most likely in a specific way, but we're completely detached from the result. And bhakti yoga is when we're just working in devotion. We have no attachment to the work or to the result. Now, sakam karma yoga, nishkam karma yoga, and nishkam karma yoga can also be bhakti yoga. Why? Because although we are working in a way that we want to work in, we are still performing bhakti yoga because, generally speaking, Krishna also wants us to act in the way that is natural for us to act, unless he otherwise states. So just because, this point I made before, but I just want to make it more clearly, just because one is performing karma yoga, and that is nishkam karma yoga, doesn't necessarily mean that they're not doing bhakti yoga. It would only not be bhakti yoga if Krishna said, no, you become a carpenter, but that person is an artist. You see what I mean? So we're all born with our particular nature, and we work according to our nature. But just because we work according to our nature doesn't mean that we are not fully surrendered to Krishna. Because generally speaking, Krishna wants us to work according to our nature. This is why he set up varnashram. Varnashram means every person who is working according to their varna and ashram, what is natural to them. Now, if Krishna comes to a kshatriya and says, you be a brahmana, or he comes to a vaishya and he says, you be a kshatriya, and we don't do it, then that is, karma yoga rather than bhakti yoga, because we're still attached to the work. So the key thing is to remove the attachment. The work itself cannot tell us whether if we're doing sakam karma yoga or nishkam karma yoga or bhakti yoga. The work itself doesn't determine that. It's the attachment and the instruction of Krishna. If Krishna tells us to do what we are also naturally inclined to do, then that's bhakti yoga if we're not attached to it. But if we're attached, then even if we're doing what is foreign to us, if we're doing it for ourselves, then it's not bhakti yoga. Okay, so I'll stop at this point. We have about a little bit of time for question and answer. So please, you can ask. I noticed that many of you have put questions in the chat room. I actually prefer the way we've always done it, and many of you joined recently, is just raise your hand, and then I go in order with the questions. And that way we can hear your questions directly from you. If you have, for some reason, a reason why you cannot ask, that's a different reason. But most people, they can just unmute themselves and ask their question. So Varsha Mataji, would you like to go first? I think her hand maybe have been up from before.
Yeah, sorry, Prabhuji, it
That's
was
okay.
from before.
No problem. Rashi Mataji?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you so much for the wonderful class. I have a question. I was not quite able to follow the Nishkam Karma Yoga and Bhakti Yoga. What is the difference between Nishkam Karma Yoga and Bhakti Yoga? What I understood from Nishkam is doing for Krishna without attachment, but Bhakti Yoga is same, right?
So, sorry, I confused you. So in Nishkam Karma Yoga, one is still attached to the work one is doing. So one says, I'll serve Krishna, everything is for Krishna, but I have to do it by being a singer, a rock star. But I'll give the result to Krishna, everything, 100%. That is called Nishkam Karma Yoga. So one's not attached to the result at all, but one is attached to the mode of work that one is doing.
Okay, got it. I have one. Sorry, go ahead.
No, and Sakam Karma Yoga is one is still attached to part of the result.
Yeah, that is clear. Just was confusion between Bhakti Yoga and Nishkam Karma.
Yes.
I have one small question, Prabhu. Won't take much time. We discussed about the desires. So, like, we take human birth and our consciousness is little higher than the other species of life, right? So if we desire, like you give an example, if we wanted to fly, so does it happen that we directly from human consciousness of life degrade to the bird species of life, or once we get a human life, it will be only human life, but your karmas will be different?
Can you repeat that once more? I didn't follow the second part.
So the second part is like based on your desires. I mean, we saw Bharat Maharaj example that he was so attached to the deer
Yes.
and he became deer. So I don't know, maybe it's my mental concoction, but I feel that if a human, if you're getting a human birth, your consciousness is very developed. You are at an elevated consciousness level, right? So
Yes.
do you get to a lower species of life where the consciousness is not that high?
So your question is why would one do that? If you as a human being your consciousness is higher, then why would you go to a lower species of life?
Yeah. Or I mean, for that matter, do you go there? I mean, is that any Shastric Praman there other than Bharat Maharaj example that
Oh
we take?
yes. So actually in this class that I was listening this morning by Srila Prabhupada, he said that, there's verses there, Krishna, where he says that wherever you leave off, when you come back, that's where you start, right? So Krishna's saying you will start from where you leave off. So there's no loss in the spiritual path. But Prabhupada says, but no, we should finish in this lifetime, because he says in your next lifetime, what is the guarantee? You may fall down again. You may fall again due to some mistake or some becoming distracted. So, so it's very often the case that one can become a human, but then again become entangled due to freedom and free will in sinful activities. And as a result, again, one falls down into the animal species of life. So animal species is basically Krishna's form of punishment. Just like in other religions, they say heaven or hell. And according to their religion, most people go to hell because they don't accept God, so they go to hell. In Vedic scriptures, there's no eternal hell, but we still make wrong choices. So then we have to go to the animal species. We suffer there for some time in those bodies for many lifetimes, and then we come back to the human species. But misuse of our freedom is something that is very, we are greatly conditioned by this.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you.
Prabhuji,
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
I have a very specific question for clarification purposes.
Okay.
If someone feeds birds on a daily routine, would it be considered devotional service then?
If those seeds that they're feeding the bird has been offered to Krishna, then it would be devotional service.
Okay, so while feeding, one can say, Krishna, this is being done for you to please you, then certainly it would be considered as a part of devotional service.
Yes. Again, we should offer the food to Krishna, not just that this is done to please you, but by offering those seeds to Krishna and then giving it to the bird, then we are giving them prasad, which is devotional service. It's giving the mercy of the Lord to different living entities.
So when we purchase that bird food,
yes,
how do we offer to Krishna?
We should take that food and say, Hare Krishna. Krishna, please accept this food. Please make it your prasad so I can give this to the birds.
Yes, sir.
And therefore it should be vegetarian, right? Obviously it will be vegetarian,
yes.
But because Krishna won't accept if it's some form of, like if we feed a tiger meat, then Krishna, we can't offer that meat to Krishna because Krishna doesn't eat meat. But in the case of birds, we can offer seeds to Krishna. Krishna says, right, patram pushpam phalam toyam. So Krishna also accepts leaves, he accepts flowers, and therefore he must accept seeds also. Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Okay. Next is Anita Mataji.
Yes, Prabhu, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
I have a question from yeah, text. I mean, we were talking about the example of the duty-free person, and in the sloka 17, and purport Prabhupada says that Prabhu wrote that a person who is fully conscious, Krishna consciousness, and is fully satisfied by his act in Krishna consciousness, no longer has any duty to perform. Can you give me any example that the person is not doing no work and he is judged by the other person that he is a fully Krishna consciousness?
So Prabhupada is saying no duty to perform means they're not obliged to perform any duties in this world, but he says they're clearly save and accept Krishna consciousness. So we have Krishna conscious duties, which is Sanatan Dharma rather than material Dharma. And virtually all the pure devotees of the Lord, you see they're examples of Sanatan Dharma. So Rupa Goswami, Sanatan Goswami, they left their minister positions, they left their families, and they were just serving the Lord. Why? Because they came to that platform. They were renounced enough to come to that platform, and therefore they came to that platform.
Yes, very good. Yes, very good example.
Yes, same thing, Srila Prabhupada, right? He was, in his pastimes, of course, he was liberated from day one, but in his pastimes, he was first living like a householder and performing his prescribed duties, at the same time, leading a very intensely spiritual life. It said that Srila Prabhupada would read Srimad Bhagavatam 4 hours a day as a householder. And therefore, this was his lifetime in preparation. Therefore, when the time came, he was ready to translate and write commentaries on Srimad Bhagavatam. So again, setting an example for us, he was a liberated soul. He would chant most likely 64 rounds every day. Later on, someone asked Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, how many rounds do you chant every day? And he said, I chant 16, because he was preaching nonstop. So that was more important. But as a householder, I never found a definite answer how many rounds he was chanting. But the standard at that time was 64 rounds. So imagine 8 hours a day, he was engaged, fully absorbed in Bhakti Yoga, probably in addition to his deity service. He probably had deities that he was taking care of as a householder. He's showing by example that in the beginning, he's performing prescribed duties, he's towards his family and his home, all the while staying Krishna conscious, and is, Bhakti Yoga is number one for him. And his family duties are part of that. And then later in his life, he's performing duties, he's acting like you're saying, but full-time absorption and preaching, just only for Krishna.
Wonderful, Prabhu. Thank you.
Thank you. Hare Krishna. Purnamasi Mataji.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thank you for the wonderful class as always. I was very, I liked your example, how you said deserve versus desire. And you gave the example of this person who thought of to be an angel and then somehow came back as a pigeon. But I was just wondering if karma is more like a complex algorithm. There are so many birds, but why even a pigeon? It could be an eagle, it could be a kite, yes. It could be a hawk or a buzzard. So it's just bewildering, and it's just beyond, I think, our mental faculty to determine
yes.
What it would be. It's just, yeah. Right. Yes. I mean, there's so many birds, right, Prabhu? I mean, why that pigeon in for that matter, right? So
yeah, so the pigeon I just gave as an example. It could be any bird.
Right. Yeah.
Yes, but your question is that, I mean, this is the complexity of karma, that that there are so many varieties and levels of desires and sinful activities that you can come in any of these forms of birds. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yes, Prabhu, because like, for example, I'm like giving an example. we talked about someone attached to the pet, someone attached to just diving down and skydiving. What about a mother who's lamenting about her son who has passed away, and that separation is still there? what do you think would be the outcome of that, Prabhu? Like, what would be her,
Yes. So there's one Purana, Garuda Puran, that gives very detailed descriptions of results of different activities. Like it's like a kind of an encyclopedia of karma that says, well, if you in this situation with these activities, you get this reaction. So in that case, it's very hard to say, because it is natural for a mother to miss her child, but then it depends, in what consciousness or mood is she, what is the rest of her life like, what is the past due to which the reaction has come. So there's so many factors, and even the Pandavas were lamenting at the loss of their children. So even a pure devotee can lament, have some feeling of separation from their family members. So it just depends upon the consciousness of that individual.
If it is more out of guilt, or because if the person has committed suicide, for example, so it's more like coming out of a guilt, or is it coming, so the consciousness is what you're saying will determine what the next.
Yes. So now for the person who has performed suicide, they will get their reaction, and that's not something considered. It is considered you get a bad reaction for that, because it's not sort of the right response. But then when a devotee performs suicide, they will maybe come back in as a devotee of the Lord, even in a subtle body, but as a devotee of the Lord. And then for the person who's grieving, for the person who's performed suicide, they must take shelter of Krishna, and too much lamentation may not help them. So that too much lamentation may create a certain consciousness that isn't helping them in spiritual life, but is rather keeping them in material life. So that experience and the lamentation is generally due to a past, the fructification of a past karma, or we cannot say just Krishna's plan, the reason that Krishna has behind this in the case of devotees. But then our response to that situation, that can be more or less Krishna conscious. And depending on how Krishna conscious our response is, it will depend upon, that will kind of, determine our future.
Yeah, Prabhu, just to give up this thing, it is my brother who committed suicide. So he was not a devotee, but always this has kind of troubled me to think that we always say that without Krishna's this thing, not even an ant will move, or without his thing, nothing will really, right? So is that something, how do we kind of come to a reconcile to that, right? I mean, we say that suicide is not it's not good, because the body is like the soul is still if it's not completed its full course, it's kind of just it's lingering around to wait for its this thing. But the other part to it is also says that without Krishna's thing, will nothing move. So it's just so conflicting, these two things at the same time. Free will is there, but even if something to happen, Krishna's these three things we say, right? God, Bhagwan, Purush, I mean, three things: material, God, and the soul. These three things have to be in union for something to happen. Even if one of them is not there, then it doesn't work. So I always kind of get torn between these two exactly conflicting thoughts.
Yes. Actually, this question that you're asking is a very essential question. It's also a question that's been asked many times, and these two things are both true, and they don't need to be in conflict. On one hand, yes, not a blade of grass moves by the will of the Lord, So like you're saying, then how do we understand this? If the Krishna is behind this, how do we understand this? No, a Krishna is not the doer, but he's the permitter. So not a blade of grass moves by the will of the Lord means that Krishna will only allow it if he allows. Only if Krishna is in charge, so to say, of this material world, can even the material world run. But we also, even though Krishna is running everything, so to say, we are also the makers of our own destiny within this world that he's made. So that is up to us. That is up to us how we lead our life. Krishna tries to give guidance. Krishna does give guidance, but not always can we accept his guidance, or Krishna also allows us to discover things ourselves, or you could say go through experiences ourselves. So this is a conversation between Maharaj Yudhishthira and Bhishma Dev. And Maharaj Yudhishthira is asking the same thing. He's saying, if the Lord is the controller of everything and he's all good, then why does he allow these things to happen? Why did he allow the battle of Kurukshetra to happen? And to this, Bhishma Dev, he responds that no one can understand the plan of Krishna. The plan of the Lord, no one can understand. But we should have faith that his plan is good, his plan is perfect, and it's for our benefit. Some or the other, it's for our benefit. Some or the other, it's for the benefit of that soul. We cannot understand why. But for every soul, the only thing the soul will experience will be for that soul's benefit. Now, Krishna's plan is there, and things happen according to Krishna's plan. And within that plan, then in the course of fulfilling his plan, we also have our free will and our free activities. So Bhishma Dev is saying we cannot understand the plan of the Lord, but he's saying, but given that this is the plan, he tells Maharaj Yudhishthira, now that you've won the war, you've fought this battle, now you must become king. And you must rule the kingdom. Why? Not because, now it's happened and you can get away with it. No, because Yudhishthira Maharaj didn't do anything wrong. He and the other Pandavas didn't want to fight, but Krishna asked them to fight. And then he's asking, well, why did Krishna want this? That we don't know, but he acted according to Krishna's desire. And now the fight is over. He's saying, now also you fulfill Krishna's instruction and you become king. So things are in Krishna's hands, but we have the choice then to follow Krishna's instructions or not. And that is where our free will is. Our free will is are we willing to go along with Krishna's plan? Are we willing to do the right thing or not in a certain situation? Actually, I wrote a book on this topic. This is the center of my, you could say, study. This same problem, the problem of evil, because it's a very difficult problem, one that devotees face as well. And in the context of devotees like yourself, it's not just karma that's acting. It's also Krishna's plan. And in the chat, I gave a link to my book. If you like, you're most welcome to read it. The only thing I'll warn you is that it's a very expensive book. It was published by Oxford University Press. So it's a big publisher, and so they charge their fees. I don't get any royalty in it at all. It's just the publisher. I was actually fortunate that they published it. So in this book, there's a whole discussion on this same contrast that you're saying. You'll see the subtitle. It says human suffering or divine play. So on one hand, you're saying, look, this is Krishna's plan. It's Krishna's Leela, the whole creation. That's divine play. On the other hand, there's human suffering. So how do we make sense of both of these things? Nitai Guna Mani Mataji. Or Anita Mataji, I think you're first. Whoever's first.
Hello, Haribo.
Hare
I think I'm done, Prabhu.
Okay. Okay. So Nitai Gunamayi Mataji.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. This is Josna Devidasi. I'm using
Hare
Prabhu's phone.
Okay.
Very beautiful class, Prabhu. So many questions got answered. Thank you so much for it. I have one question, Prabhu, that many a times this is asked that why do one has to suffer the result of karma in the upcoming life, not in the same life? So we know, okay, we are doing bad thing, we're going to get bad result. We are doing good thing, we're going to get good results. Listening to your class, what I understood, and please correct me and tell me what is the right answer, that if that happens, then we'll again be chasing good karma and bad karma. Okay, I don't have to do bad karma because I'm going to get bad result. I have to do good karma. Maybe Krishna does, and Krishna doesn't want that. He wants us to be out of good and bad both. So he wants us to contemplate, think what's happening with me, why happening, and what is the root cause of this problem, and then take his shelter. And please let me know how this question is, and we can answer this question. Hare Krishna.
Yes, Hare Krishna. It's a very nice question that you asked. And there's many different reasons why Krishna does this. One reason you mentioned, that Krishna wants us to act good for the sake of being good. And therefore, Krishna gives us the impression through the lives of others and through our own life, he gives the impression that we can do the wrong thing and get away with it. Why? Because otherwise we would only act out of fear, not out of the desire to be actually good. Just like, imagine if every time I slapped someone, there's a magic hand that came out and slapped me. Then I would not even have the option to be bad, because just out of self-survival, I would be good. But Krishna doesn't want robots. He doesn't want us to be that way. But at the same time, he's warning us, he's teaching us that by seeing the lives of others and seeing how people suffer, we should question that, why do people suffer? And then the answer is there because of past karma. And by observing others, we can learn that don't do the wrong thing, because in this life or in the next, I will suffer the result. So he's not forcing us, but at the same time, he's giving us knowledge by allowing us to see that, yes, other people suffer. If at this time I'm not suffering, even we are suffering so much, but that recognition shows that, okay, there must be a reason. They had a good life, but now all of a sudden they're suffering. This is due to the past. So I shouldn't think that in this life I can get away with it, because it'll come back in my next life. Now, another reason why Krishna allows us to suffer the reaction in the next life is because sometimes he needs to let us enjoy, to fulfill our material enjoyments, so that we can get over those desires and then give us the reaction, right? So someone has a desire to lead a demoniac life. If Krishna immediately starts giving them the reaction in that lifetime, they will not fulfill those desires. So Krishna, this material world is made to fulfill the desire and also give us punishment to realize that it's not worthwhile. But unless Krishna allows us to try, we won't even know that it won't bring me pleasure, right? So the point is to make us frustrated, but we can only become frustrated if we have the opportunity to try. And it's showing us that even if we have top-class material enjoyment, we still are miserable, right? So they don't get the reaction, but even that enjoyment doesn't give them pleasure. So, but we should be clear on the point that the soul is still learning, even if we get the reaction in the next life. So we didn't learn in that life, but in our next life, just a few years later, we learned that lesson. On a subconscious, and this is actually a verse in the Bhagavatam that I quote in my chapter in my book, that on a subconscious level, the soul is learning. The Bhagavatam says the consciousness is still progressing. It's still learning. So we don't learn in this life, but in our next life, from the point of view of the cosmos, from the cosmic point of view, it's only 40 years later or 30 years later. where that soul is getting the reaction and learning that lesson.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Hare Krishna. Thank you. Rama, Mataji, would you like to ask your question? I see it in the chat room, but I didn't. I thought you could ask it if you like.
Haribol, Prabhu, thank you for
Hare
such a nice
Krishna.
class. I'm sorry, I'm listening from my phone, so that's why I don't have
No
my
problem.
video up. I do apologize. So I was just wondering about this good point that you had made, that devotees, we don't read the Vedas, but sometimes I wonder, I like think about that, because everything that we talk about, we reference the Vedas, but we don't actually read the Vedas. So I was just asking, like, the Srimad Bhagavatam, like, where does that come into it? Because I always think of the Srimad Bhagavatam as the Vedas, but it's not really part of the Vedas. And then, like, my second part of that question, which really isn't that important, but, you know, I've read online people saying, oh, the Vaishnavas, they don't know what they're talking about. They don't even read the Vedas. They only study the Srimad Bhagavatam. That doesn't even count. That's not even real. That's not important. It's not, you know, they dismiss the Hindu culture, Hindu Vedic culture and all this. And I just wanted to know what you had to say about that. Thank you, Hare Krishna.
Very nice questions. So the Vedas, reading the Vedas is, why don't we read it as devotees? That's the first question, most important. That, okay, I mean, as devotees, we ourselves should be interested, right? Forget about others, but why ourselves? Reading the Vedas is kind of like, it's just like reading the English dictionary. It's very nice to do. There's nothing wrong doing it, but we feel it's kind of a waste of time, because the dictionary is there and the words are there to communicate the message. So we prefer reading Shakespeare rather than the English dictionary. In the same way, the Vedas, if you actually read them, which I've opened them, I haven't read them, but read passages, they're very technical, very detailed, and they give all sorts of rituals for certain situations, for every pious activity. And while the dictionary serves as the basis for the whole English language, it's the most important book in our language, although we don't, even though it serves the basis, we don't read it. In the same way, the Vedas are the words spoken by God, very foundational, but no point in reading it. Rather, like you correctly said, we read the essence of the Vedas, the purpose of the Vedas, the fruit of the Vedas, which the author himself has written, which is Srimad Bhagavatam. So all the dictionaries leading to this, so all the Vedas are leading to this knowledge, that Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam, that just surrender to Krishna. And so that knowledge is there in the Bhagavatam, and therefore we get and this is what Krishna says in the Gita also, oh Arjuna, don't read the Vedas, don't become enamored by the flowery language of the Vedas, but understand the purpose of the Vedas. This is, Krishna directly says this, understand the purpose of the Vedas. What is their goal? And that is the Bhagavad Purana. It's giving us that purpose. So we are reading the Vedas through the Bhagavatam, but we choose not to read the English dictionary. Now, as far as what other people say, quite honestly, they don't read the Vedas either. There's only like one English translation of the Rig Veda. So if all these people are reading the Vedas, where's the translations? And that one translation of the Rig Veda you find in libraries, it's not even like available on Amazon.com. So their criticism is just for the sake of criticism. Reading the Vedas is very boring, honestly. There's some South Indian Brahmanas you can find on YouTube who still recite the Vedas, and that's very beautiful. Veda is the word of God, and they recite it. They will memorize entire Vedas and recite it for hours on end. They're from the Mimamsaka tradition, where their very practice of bhakti, their very practice of devotion is reciting the Vedas. So that practice is there, and very few people do that. Again, they recite it very beautifully, but after 30 minutes, you get a headache. It's very boring. It's just the same, monotone. It goes again and again and again. So the process that we have is what the Vedas are teaching. It's the goal of the Vedas. The process, what we are following, is the process that the Vedas want us to practice. So why should we then do any other process? And if someone wants to do it, they can show by example. But I just haven't seen anyone, except for a few Brahmanas who do it once in a while. Even they do it once in a while, who just read the Vedas. Most people, they read the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita, which is, again, it's the fruit of the Vedas. The Upanishads are actually part of the Vedas. So we do read the Upanishads. That's Ishopanishad. And when people talk about reading the Vedas, they talk about the Upanishads. So even they read the essence of the Vedas in the form of the Upanishads. And then Gita is called Gita Upanishad. It's almost accepted as like the ultimate Upanishad because it's spoken by Krishna, but it's actually part of the Mahabharata. So if they believe in the Vedas per se so much, why are they reading the Bhagavad Gita? It's part of the Mahabharata. So we're not interested exactly in all the details. We're interested in reading what Krishna wants us to read.
Thank you, Prabhu. I love our class, and I'm so grateful we have you as our teacher. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Very grateful to have your association also. Wonderful. Thank you very much, everyone, for your association. We're right on time. It's time to end now. So I will post the homework for chapter 3 today, and we will see you next week to do chapter 4. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Prabhuji, jai.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.